Welcome to Parev TV. We are truly honored to be joined by Dr. Stephen Badalyan Riegg, professor of history at Texas A&M University, and learn more about his book. And there is his book. It's entitled Russia's Entangled Embrace, the Tsarist Empire and the Armenians, 1801-1914, published by Cornell University Press in 2020. Dr. Riegg, thank you for your many years of research in archives in St. Petersburg, Moscow, Yerevan, Armenia, and other places to help us study and understand the, I would say, and you've said, oscillating relationship between the Tsarist Empire and Armenians during the 100 plus years. Today, in fact, April 7th, 2021, Putin and Pashinyan met in Moscow earlier, a few hours ago. My first question to you is, when and why did you decide to focus on this period and enlighten us?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the show. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. Let me begin with just a few comments about my personal background, which goes directly into how I got to researching this topic and eventually writing the book. I was born in Armenia in the late Soviet era, in an ethnic Armenian family that was mostly Russian-speaking as a result of their education under the Soviet system. Growing up in the 90s, in the dark 90s in Yerevan, I observed but did not yet understand the array of Armenian perceptions of the Russian role in Armenia's politics and the Armenian security situation in Armenian economics. I noticed the array. I didn't understand it for many years, but I think it kind of established a little budding interest in me to study not just Armenian history, but Russian history. And by the, we'll skip forward by several decades, but by the time I was a university student, I was finishing up my studies and I started graduate school. I knew that I wanted to study Russian imperialism, not the Soviet era, but the Romanov era, the 19th century. And I wanted to focus on the question of Russian political policies, the evolution of policies towards Armenians. And I read as much as I could on that topic, especially in English and Russian. And that's how I came to this project. But I think my childhood really kind of sow the seeds for that topic before I was even consciously aware of it.
You have done an amazing job. I will be reading Professor Suni's comments in a moment, but in this book, what we find out is that the Tsarist government relied on Armenians to build its empire in the Caucasus, at least. And at least I did not know, because for many Armenians, Armenian history begins after 1915. There was so much literature and so much information about the period after 1915. Very few people have really studied or understood the relationship between Tsarist Russia and Armenians. And in the final analysis, this relationship continues, and we are left with the same question. After the 44-day war, the one major question was, is Russia a friend or an ally of Armenians? This has been going on up and down. Can you answer that?
No, I cannot answer that. And I would be very suspicious and very skeptical of anyone who claims to have a decisive, clear answer to that question. I think the reality, as many of your guests on the show have emphasized over the past 6 months, is that Russia's present and recent past behavior has been exemplary of this complicated, complex dynamic of being both a friend, a foe, and something other, a third category. it's really not helpful for us as Armenians. It's not helpful for anyone, the global community that barely understands what the heck is going on in the South Caucasus, to think in such essentialized, reductive categories. Russia, belatedly, to the chagrin of many Armenians, came in and finally stepped into the conflict. Things could have been probably worse, but it has its own self-interests
Absolutely.
as the paramount objective. Russia is only acting out of its own national interests, as most states do, as all states probably do. So there's no use in discussing, are the Russians our friends? Are they our enemies? Do they care? Do they not care? These are such ambiguous and not helpful categories. We have to get into the specific details, the precise actions, policies, deeds, in order to get a more tangible understanding of these complex dynamics.
You know, what is interesting, time and again, we see before the 1915 genocide, Armenians went through a lot of unpleasant massacres and torturous and injustices, and by Turkey, by Ottoman Turkey mainly, and Russia did nothing actually to antagonize Turkey. They just stay there looking at the situation till things calm down. And it seems the same pattern repeated itself during the 44-day war. They waited for the right time, which serves their interest, to come in when they had to, they wanted to for their interests.
Yeah, that's been a common narrative. It was throughout the war. It has been over the past couple months. Should the Russians have intervened quicker? Could they have intervened sooner? Why didn't they? Why didn't they act more decisively? Why didn't they apply more diplomatic or political or direct military pressure? These are complicated topics. I don't think anyone really has clear answers to them unless they have a very close relationship with Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin and Lavrov. I mean, nobody really knows, but the national interests are really at stake. There was a lot of useless debate during the war about whether Putin was biding his time in order to send a message or to punish Pashinyan for his long record of anti-Russian or antagonistic comments, going back to the Eurasian Economic Union, to other factors in the bilateral relationship. By now, the bottom line is that Russia has regained its very traditional standing as a major power in the South Caucasus, as a broker, as a power player. Armenia has lost the war decisively, and thus, due to the Russian intervention, which saved Armenia from worse losses, it has given up some of its sovereignty, some of its political decision-making. And we see that reflected in the fact that Armenia is not, at the moment, and very unlikely to be in the near future, taking a truly significant pivotal role in the diplomatic negotiations over Karabakh. This is going to come down to Azerbaijan, Russia, and to a certain degree, Turkey, with a secondary, I think, position from Russia, from Armenia, the Republic of Armenia. But the bottom line is that Russia, again, is a broker, a power player in the region. And that is the reality. That's the reality that we have to deal with. And there is no point in trying to paint the Russians with a broad stroke or box them into a specific category.
You know, speaking about realities on the ground, time and again in your book, you mentioned the fact that Armenia is on the borderline between three empires: Russian, Ottoman, Persian Empire. One year this guy attacks Armenia, the other time there's Western Armenians and Eastern Armenians. Honestly, not only is empire building a messy operation, but surviving in that region for Armenians has been extremely, almost impossible. And maybe you can tell us how we survived. What was it? And you spoke a lot about the church, Echmiadzin's role.
I think that the fact that we did survive, the fact that we didn't just survive, but we emerged at the end of the 20th century as an independent state, which has had its laundry list of very specific and very real problems and shortcomings and failures, is the fact that we did survive at the threshold of three expansionist, often aggressive, often belligerent powers in itself is impressive, considering the reality of our demographic, numerical, other strengths and standings. So that in itself is something to be cognizant of and perhaps proud of. We did it through a tremendous range of modes of adaptability. It's not just the church. The church is one of the key, but it's one of the several key explanations for the Armenian ability to navigate the bloody, messy era of imperialism, of empires, and to survive past the genocide into the 20th, 21st centuries. The diaspora of the 19th century, before there was such a thing as the modern diaspora of the post-Soviet era, was a huge factor. We tend to think of the diaspora in the modern era as being limited to, I don't know, maybe Lebanon, Russia, France, the United States, and a few tiny pockets elsewhere outside of those particular countries. But going back not just to the 19th century, but to the early modern era, as certain people have written on, the Armenian diaspora was influential, economically energetic, very vital, very networked, connected, self-conscious, and spread from the Indian Ocean to the North Atlantic. The sense, another factor would be a very strong consciousness of a national identity grounded more in culture, I would say, in the 19th century than any political mentality, early on at least. So there are a lot of factors that allowed Armenians to adapt to rapidly evolving circumstances, to navigate the difficult, the inescapably difficult circumstances that they faced at the threshold of Russian, Ottoman, and Persian empires. But as my book really highlights, at least for the first half of the 19th century, I would say actually moving up into the 1870s. Overall, and now I am essentializing, which I always try not to do, but for the purposes of this conversation, I'll essentialize. Overall, up until the 1870s or so, the Russo-Armenian political dynamic was mainly symbiotic. What I mean by that is that Armenians derived various tangible political and by extension social and economic and maybe to a small degree cultural advantages from their participation in the Russian imperial project. They not only helped the Russians early on with expanding into the Caucasus, but they also participated in the administration, the governance of the region, the economy, the economic development of the region, and the empire itself in mid-century.
You know, definitely one person who helped that participation was the dynasty. I never heard of them, Lazarev. Can you tell us more about the Lazarev dynasty and the role they played, and how come they turned to be so successful? What did they have to offer the Russian tsars or Russian people?
The Lazarevs are a fascinating example. They're probably the ultimate Russian-Armenian intermediaries. They are a quintessential example of not just a co-opted national elite, co-opted by an imperial state, but of an intermediary that really bridged the cultural, the political gap between the metropole, the state, and the periphery or the subject nation. The Lazarevs were moved to Russia from Persia in the 18th century. They were very disciplined. They were very focused on entrepreneurship.
Mhm.
By the second half of the 18th century, the Russian state, Catherine the Great, admitted them into the Russian nobility with all the rights and privileges granted on a hereditary basis. And in the early 19th century, the Lazarevs emerged as really the representatives, the spokesmen, the advocates of Armenian interests, at least within and probably beyond ever expanding Tsarist borders. And the Lazarevs had real influence at the highest levels of the Tsarist government. They were personally acquainted, maybe not friends, but they were personally acquainted with various Russian foreign ministers, with interior ministers. The interior minister was the second most powerful position in the Romanov Empire. And they really could represent Armenian interests. And then, of course, in 1815, they established what ended up being one of their more famous eternal, really, contributions to Russo-Armenian ties. They established the Lazarev Academy of Oriental Languages, which enjoyed real prestige, real recognition from ethnic Russian scholars, academics who sent their own children, who recognized the graduates as having specialist knowledge, understanding. And yeah, to this day, the Lazarevs tend to enjoy a fairly good reputation in the Russian historical thinking. There is a plaque in central St. Petersburg to this day, very nicely renovated, updated, perhaps by the local Armenian community, but definitely with the full support of the Russian government today. It's right on the building that the family owned in the mid to late 18th century on Nevsky Prospect, the central avenue, St. Petersburg, next to the Armenian Church of St. Catherine. So yeah, that family was very influential in bridging the gap and representing Armenian interests at the highest levels of Russian governance.
You know, you speak about the years after 1870. There was when I was in school, I would learn history. There was the Eastern Question, and we would learn how after the Crimea War, all these interesting details. But also in 1870, after the Treaty of Berlin, Armenians know the story of Kharimian Hayrik, who represent Armenians with other members in Berlin. But after that period, there was the nationalistic movement within the Armenian society. And Russia, I don't think, cared too much. But was there ever any movement that was geared against Russia, or was it mainly Turkey?
Yeah, it's a really interesting chapter in Armenian history. It's a very interesting chapter in Russian-Armenian political ties. You're right, by the second half of the 19th century, really after the midpoint of the 70s, the first evidence I could find was from 1875, but it's really the famous narrative is that from the 1880s onward, but I think it might be even slightly earlier, from the 1880s onward, there's a parallel dynamic of the rise of various strands of Armenian political self-initiative, self-determination, political activism, soon to be labeled nationalism. And parallel to that, there is, of course, a Russian concern, anxiety, paranoia, overreaction to these various strands. The Hunchaks, the Dashnaks, they don't really become politically solidified and politically viable, active until the 90s, the 1890s. But before them, they have 2 decades really of predecessors of Tsarist subjects, that means Eastern Armenians who are very active in the underground press, who are active in political propagandizing, in writing illicit pamphlets, booklets, in collecting money, in speaking to students, in writing these patriotic songs and convincing students to do certain things. And what are they all focusing on? What is their main umbrella objective, if we can even try to identify an overarching goal? It's the plight of Ottoman Armenians. It's the plight, the situation of the Western Armenians. It is not the internal situation in the Tsarist Empire, in the Russian Empire. That does not become a point of Armenian political activism until the turn of the 20th century, until right about the confiscation of Echmiadzin's properties in 1903. Up until that point, with a few exceptions, but I'm generalizing here, up until that point, almost the primary focus is on the Ottoman Armenian situation.
You know, today the polls show that most Armenians value close relationship with the Russians. Even Pashinyan today said to Putin, no matter who wins in the election, we want our relationship to be firm and continue the strong relationship between Armenia and Russia. And Kremlin knows that Armenia remains beholden to Russian security. How would you play the game?
Well, I think the polls show that the population is tilted in that direction. We see Pashinyan making these statements now that seemed unfathomable 2 years ago, because of the pragmatic response of various levels of Armenian society to what happened a few months ago. I will point out, however, even before the war, the majority of Armenians in polling did demonstrate interest in maintaining strong ties to Russia, and that was still grounded in what you said, in the understanding that Armenia is so beholden to Russia for security. There was no alternative to that before last year's war. There certainly is no alternative to that now in the foreseeable future. Nobody in Armenia seriously proposed before last year that the EU or the United States or NATO or I don't know which alliance or country could replace Russia as a guarantor of territorial integrity of the Republic of Armenia, protecting the airspace, protecting the borders. And I see that now Pashinyan, that's the #1 accusation, I think, maybe #2 accusation against him domestically. Even Pashinyan sees the reality, the writing on the wall. And there's no escaping that fact. And, you know, I will go as far as to say, what do people who criticize Pashinyan for this attitude, what do people who criticize the majority of the Armenian citizenry for their positive perception of our Russian assistance, what do they offer as an alternative? There is no viable alternative. There wasn't before the war, there certainly isn't now, to direct Russian assistance, mainly military security assistance, but to some degree economic assistance as well.
You know, this book of yours, very, very interesting. I repeat, the title is Russia's Entangled Embrace, the Tsarist Empire and the Armenians, 1801-1914. It covers the reigns of Alexander II, Alexander III, Nicholas II, and many times the politics of the region changes based on the mood or the character of the Tsar, which is very understandable, but also the interests of the country. I'd like to read what Ronald Grigor Suni wrote about your book. He says, Russia's entangled embrace is written in fluent, clear, and persuasive prose, giving a deeply textured account of Russian imperial relations with the non-Russians, in this case, primarily the Armenians. This excellent book illuminates both Russian imperial practices and empire making more widely. You have received a lot of praise, and let me just say, there's so much we can talk about your book, so much interesting information about all you have written. You're breathing a breath of fresh air into Armenian history, honestly. And I enjoyed your writing style, and I honestly was very disappointed when the book did not ended. And I thought it should continue. Maybe they should be like New Testament and Old Testament, or Old Testament New. What I wanted to ask you is, you mentioned Gregory Suni's in a couple chapters, and you also mentioned Huri Berberian in quoting her. But my question to you, there is a great concern within the Armenian circle that there are less people interested in Armenian genocide studies or Armenian studies. How do you see that field, and what can we do to encourage that?
It's a good question. I will point out that from my perception, I'll say two things. One about the younger generation of scholars, and then about the organizations. First, let me start with the organizations. From my point of view, the two main bodies, mainly scholarly, but I think they're very actively engaged with the community. The National Association for Armenian Research and Studies and Research, and the SAS, the Society for Armenian Studies. I think they're very active. I think they are doing themselves important work. I think they have, from what I can tell, large memberships, diverse memberships, active memberships. I think they are really making tangible contributions to helping young, not just established, young scholars get started. They provide funds, they provide invitations to speak, to talk, to conduct their research. Funding is one of the top issues in the humanities and social sciences, of course. The other thing I'll say is that there are maybe not as many as there used to be, but I think there are quite a few young scholars, people at my level and near me, who are actively working, perhaps not right on the genocide, but on other important, very important topics in Armenian history and Armenian studies. You pointed out that my narrative ends in 1914, on the eve of the war, and of course, right before the genocide. It's not an accident, it's not an oversight, it's an intentional strategy. The genocide, of course, is such a huge topic that if I were to try to address it in a subsection of one chapter towards the end of the book, I couldn't do it justice. That's an important enough topic that it deserves a very extended, dedicated study. Luckily, there are young scholars based in the US and elsewhere who are working on that precise topic. I'll point out Asya Darbanyan from Clark University, who is studying Russian responses to the Armenian genocide. I think she's doing very important work. There are young people elsewhere who are established, who are becoming established. My fellow assistant professor of history at USC, Richard Antaramyan, just published a very interesting, very cogent look at the political role of Armenians in the Ottoman system. He looks at Armenians in the 19th century and Western Armenians in the 19th century in a similar vein to what I look at Eastern Armenians in the Romanov Empire. So there's in the West, in the United States, there are Asid Arbenyan, Richard Ardaramian. There are other people who work on early modern Armenian history, especially at UCLA. There are people in the Republic of Armenia itself who are writing really interesting work that is no longer restricted or limited or really afflicted by ideologies or really outdated methodologies. So no, I would say that I have a lot of reason to be optimistic, and we all should be optimistic about the state of the field. I think overall we have a fairly healthy field for vitality.
Let me here add in the book, it says very clearly, this publication was made possible by a generous grant from the Dolores Zohrab Liebman Fund. That's something we should stress too. Very good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm very grateful to the trustees, to the administrators of the fund for that support. It's a huge, huge contribution to making this book possible. The fact that you're holding it in large part is thanks to that fund. So I'm very grateful to them, and I think this is one of those important specific pieces of evidence that there is reason to be optimistic when such a prestigious established fund supports young people such as myself. I'm a first-time author. This is my first book, and they took a chance on me. And I think I'm not only personally grateful, but I also think this is a really good sign of the health status of our field.
You know, once again, congratulations on your first book, but you're also busy on another project, Westerners in Tsar's East, European Lives in Imperial Russia's Caucasus. What is that all about?
I'm working on I'm starting on the next project, and I'm still fascinated by the array of Russian methods of imperialism in the Caucasus, in the South Caucasus, in the North Caucasus. I think it's absolutely fascinating how many intentionally trial and error methods of rule the Romanovs implemented before they felt that they had come as close as possible to achieving the ultimate aims of imperialism, which is sociopolitical stability and economic vitality. So I'm looking at how the Russians experimented with bringing in Western European settlers, colonists, expatriates, entrepreneurs.
Yeah. One last thing, I really enjoyed the very last line in your book. You really, I said, what else, how else could you describe, what else does he have to surprise me with? And you said that if it's a chess game we were playing, the pawn is still standing after the checkmate. And it's a beautiful way of ending. I mean, your writing skills, I think much more than the subject matter, your writing skills is really beautiful. Very, I don't know.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your saying that. I'm very grateful for those kind words.
Is there anything else you would like to add that we might have missed, because this could continue for a while?
No, I'm very grateful.
Buy the book. Where can we get the book?
You can buy the book from your favorite bookseller. It should be fairly widely available. I believe it's fairly widely available. It's certainly available from Amazon and other traditional booksellers. It's available from smaller booksellers too, I believe. I think that Abril Books in LA and Nasser have either just run out of stock or they are replenishing their stocks of the book. I should also point out that if anyone would like to purchase it directly from Cornell University Press, there is a discount code, which I will send to you, Vartan, at the end to distribute. But yeah, it should be pretty widely available. I'll also say, because I've received a few requests about this over the past few months, if for any reason anyone would like an autographed copy, all you have to do is contact me and we'll arrange that.
That's a beautiful thing to be asked, and
yeah, it's incredible. I still
you're just beginning, and I really would I'll sell the farm and put all the money on you.
no, please don't do that. Please don't do that.
I hope to see you in New York, New Jersey area. Maybe you could come and give us a lecture sometimes when this pandemic is behind us. And
I would love to.
Once again, congratulations. That was Stephen Badalyan Riegg, Russia's Entangled Embrace, the Tsarist Empire and the Armenians, 1801-1914. And thank you again, Dr. Riegg.
Thank you so much. It's been a privilege to be here.
Thank you.